I want to tell you a weird little story about an average movie that did something strange. A little while ago, I got curious about Netflix's top 10. You know, that silly little bar that tries to peer pressure us into also watching Rebel Moon. Netflix was the first company to make a top 10, but now they are everywhere. Apple TV Plus has one, Prime Video has one, and of course, Max has one. And I get it. One of the biggest problems with streaming is how tough it can be for a company like Netflix, who's constantly churning out new shows and movies, to surface stuff people actually want to watch. And many of Netflix's biggest hits over the last few years have been somewhat viral series that charted on the top 10. Take Squid Game. Like, sure, it's an incredible show. Word of mouth and positive reviews certainly helped get it the attention it deserved, but also, it's a Korean series without any actors most American audiences recognize by name, and it is called Squid Game, something that on its face sounds gross. And yet, it became so popular so quickly that the corporations immediately divorced the brand from all meaning so they could use it to do more capitalism, a process that usually takes at least a month. So the top 10 was a huge success. Audiences liked it because it made the process of finding a new show less stupid. Creatives liked it because it seemed to reward quality shows, and that would in theory lead to hypothetically getting paid more maybe someday. And Netflix liked that people were able to easily find popular stuff, which was frequently their own programming. Netflix was also able to use the top 10 for advertising, because up until this point, all we really had were those esoteric figures like watch time. Like, okay, so 1 million people watched Eternals this weekend. Is that like a good number compared to other weekends? I have no idea. But a movie hanging around at the #1 spot on Netflix's top 10 for a month, everybody knows what that means. But as of now, Netflix does one more thing that none of the other streamers do. They publish the full numbers, a weekly set of rankings that includes information like watch time and is even split up by country. It's a lot of information, and I'm glad they put it together, because once you give it a look, you notice some strange things. Like, what tends to do well? Well, TV is mostly Netflix originals. And I think it's difficult to deny that Netflix shows are some of the best on TV. In 2023, Netflix gave us Beef, Blue-Eyed Samurai, House of Usher, All the Light We Cannot See, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, One Piece, and new seasons of Heartstopper, and I Think You Should Leave. Sure, there's plenty of trashy reality TV and stuff, but Netflix does tend to produce quality TV series that people really like, and they show up on the top 10. Movies, however, are all over the place. Sure, sometimes the top 10 is Netflix original movies that are great. After all, they are throwing money at creatives like Martin Scorsese, David Fincher, and Rian Johnson, so they end up with movies that are both critically acclaimed and people watch. But those are also pretty rare. For the most part, on the movies top 10, you're looking at 4 things. First, there's Netflix originals that are decidedly not great but get a big push from the studio. These are your Rebel Moons and Hubie Halloween and Thunder Forces. They'll hit the top 10 usually for a week and then disappear. Second, you've got stuff for kids. When you look at the numbers, so many of Netflix's top 10 record holders are kids movies like Sing 2 or Despicable Me 2. Kids love them, parents don't hate them, so Netflix tends to snap up a lot of theatrically released movies directed at children and the kids watch, which is fine, unless, third, is softcore pornography. I don't know if everybody remembers the saga of 365 Days, an adaptation of a popular Polish romance novel, but it had a moment. In the summer of 2020, 365 Days hit #1 on Netflix's top 10, and it stayed there for 31 days, which made it the longest streak of that year. So for a full month in 2020, Netflix's most watched movie had multiple, pretty explicit, and also, and this is just editorializing, not very good sex scenes for a whole month. June, the month that CoComelon made its jump to Netflix. And that might be a problem, especially since outside of checking a box labeled kid when creating the account, which limits that profile to only be able to see content for audiences 12 and younger, none of the rest of the parental controls are shown up front. I would imagine a lot of parents wouldn't even think to look for them. And I'm not trying to sound like a concerned dad at a school board meeting. This just exists to illustrate an issue that you may already be noticing. Netflix doesn't really have a brand anymore. Maybe it never did. Maybe it was always just the red streaming service. But the top 10 illustrates how unfocused Netflix is. Outside of the top show and movie usually being a Netflix original, and CoComelon being somewhere in the 7s or 8s, what else populates the list is anybody's guess. Original fantasy series? Popular children's cartoons? Stockholm Syndrome romance novel? It can be anything. I wouldn't say Max fares much better, but they do have a somewhat consistent identity. It's prestige drama, adult humor, WB stuff, so Batman, Matrix, Lord of the Rings, and then I guess also Sesame Street. After 365 days, the movie Not the Amount of Time, Gasper Knows Love hit the top 10. Love is a very different movie, but it's even more shocking. And at the time, there was a viral TikTok trend for both 365 Days and then for Love, where TikTokers would react to the sex scenes, so that definitely helped the whole thing get off the ground. So when Netflix isn't for toddlers, it's for horny teens on TikTok. The fourth kind of movie on the Netflix top 10 is really the one that confounds me. Every so often, a random movie that bombed theatrically will do really well on Netflix. Usually seemingly based off star power and brand awareness, telling audiences that like, oh yeah, The Shack was a theaters movie, maybe it's good. And even if it's not, you usually need to get to the end of a movie like The Snowman to truly understand how bad it is, and by then it's got your view. But while investigating, I happened upon one movie that didn't really fit into any of those categories. It wasn't a Netflix original, it wasn't for kids, it wasn't porn, and it wasn't a theatrically released movie with a big star that bombed. So what was it doing at the number 2 spot the week of September 5th? So let's talk about SAS Rise of the Black Swans. SAS Rise of the Black Swans was written by Lawrence Malkin and Andy McNabb. It was directed by Magnus Martins and stars Outlander Sam Heughan as Tom Buckingham and Batwoman's Ruby Rose as Grace Lewis. The best way I can describe SAS Rise of the Black Swans is that it's one of those movies, you know? This might not make sense, but Olympus Has Fallen is not one of those movies, but London Has Fallen is. Inexpensive, but not cheap, not exciting, but also not bad. You certainly can watch it, but I'd be surprised if you were raving about it. It's 2 hours of by-the-numbers action starring romantic leads that have almost some chemistry. The plot is unnecessarily twisty, it's way too long, it didn't get a big theatrical push, its biggest star is probably Andy Serkis. Basic story goes like this. Tom Wilkinson, the guy with those baguettes, RIP, is the head of a mercenary company called the Black Swans. His second in command is his sociopathic daughter, played by Ruby Rose. And in case you want to say, well actually, sociopathy is very different, I hear you. This is what the movie thinks. It treats her like someone who is able to do the best killings because she has no empathy, only kill. It's dumb. They're hired to do some secret thing by a government official played by Andy Serkis. Meanwhile, a cop played by Outlander Sam Heughan is hot on the trail of the Black Swans, but he does not kill them. Bummer. It's okay, because he's about to go on vacation with his nurse girlfriend, played by Ant-Man and the Wasp's Hannah John Kamen, where he plans to propose. The two take a train, but while it's in a tunnel, the train is hijacked by Ruby Rose and a bunch of goons as part of a scheme. Sam Heughan being on the train is a complete coincidence, but you know what that means? Die Hard. It's Die Hard in a stationary train in a tunnel. Sam Heughan runs around the train a lot, Ruby Rose chases him, Hannah John Kamen does first aid and tries to rescue one little girl, and also behind the scenes, Andy Serkis, Noel Clarke, and Tom Hopper are all trying and failing to negotiate something, or if that doesn't work, just kill all the Black Swans, which they mostly do. Eventually, it turns out Ruby Rose was secretly working for the police and MI6 and pretty much everyone in the British government except Sam Heughan. He stops to Die Hard and kills Ruby Rose, but not before she exposes corruption. Hannah John Kamen doesn't want to get married anymore because Sam Heughan is also a sociopath who loves murder. Then she changes her mind. The end. Now I think you can see some of the flaws here. Die Hard ripoffs are a dime a dozen. Plenty of movies include a scrappy underdog navigating a hostage situation from behind enemy lines, and very few of them are that good. Hell, there are really only 2 good Die Hard movies. So why was this one doing so well? Why did this thoroughly average action movie, without any huge stars or clear pitch, make its way to the 2nd spot on the biggest streaming service on Earth? Well, SAS Rise of the Black Swans was not always this movie's name. It's actually only its name on Netflix, because everywhere else this movie is listed by its original name, SAS Red Notice. Now, this charted on the week of September 5th, 2021. Can any of you guess what trailer also happened to debut that same week? That's right. On September 2nd, 2021, Netflix dropped the first teaser trailer for their $200 million action comedy starring The Rock, Ryan Reynolds, and Gal Gadot. Red Notice. You probably don't remember much about Red Notice, even though based on Netflix's numbers, you're probably watching it right now. We all are, always. Red Notice was the product of Dwayne "The Rock" the Tooth Fairy, the Game Plan, the Black Adam, then back to The Rock Johnson, and writer-director Ross and Marshall Thurber, who also wrote and directed Dodgeball, Skyscraper, Ryan Hansen Solves Crimes on Television, and that Terry Tate office linebacker commercial that I still think about at least once a month. The plot goes something like this. Dwayne Johnson plays Josh Hartley, but it could easily be Frank Wolf, Davis Okoye, Will Sawyer, Raymond Gaines, or Hobbs, but just from the fate of the Furious and Hobbs and Shaw. He's an FBI profiler, not even an agent, profiler with the body of a Hawaiian god. He is smart, polite, and by the book, but that doesn't mean he can't unwind after a hard day's work by enjoying the smoothest drink known to man, Terramana tequila. Neat, label out. Ryan Reynolds plays an art thief named Nolan Booth, but you can basically just call him Deadpool because that's what he's doing in this one. Like Jim Carrey, if instead of maxing out humor, he split those stats between humor and abs. Booth is an art thief who just stole one of Cleopatra's famous golden eggs, and just as he's home free and gets ready to enjoy a tasty aviation gin, finds that A, the egg was already stolen from him by another art thief, and B, the FBI is here and he's under arrest. Hartley is also framed for the theft, which doesn't even kind of make sense when we get to the third act, but the pair, Hartley and Booth, are both sent to a Siberian prison by one Interpol agent for an art theft that I'm pretty sure took place in Rome, but whatever. The two agree to team up to escape and find the remaining 2 eggs. Oh yeah, there's 3 of them. And then they're going to expose the rival art thief, which will get Booth a higher profile, which he, an art thief, for some reason wants. And it will clear Hartley's name, and he can go back to being a friendly, likable 4-quadrant FBI agent that plays well overseas. Now the rival, Bishop, is played by the 3rd megastar in this, Gal Gadot, and she is given more to do here than in anything else I've ever seen her in, and it doesn't really work. Not everyone can play every role. I'd say this is better suited to a Tessa Thompson, or Emily Blunt, or Zazie Beetz, or someone like that. I could also see Lady Gaga, or Zoe Saldana, or Halle Berry, or Mary Louise Parker, or Julia Louis-Dreyfus, or Jennifer Aniston, or Salma Hayek. Point is, I think we had a lot of good options. But the real MVP of Red Notice is Chris Diamantopoulos playing a bad guy the gang runs afoul of named Sottovoce. And just by looking at this guy, you're like, he's gonna have some accent, and boy does he.
It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all to my humble home.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's my video, so whatever. I think Chris Diamantopoulos is so talented and not enough people know him by name. You may recognize Chris Diamantopoulos from Silicon Valley, Invincible, Miss Davis, Jedi Survivor, Justice Society, Skylanders, The Office, The Three Stooges movie, and what must be his biggest moneymaker currently, the official voice of Mickey Mouse. And he's Greek. I love Brett Goldstein as much as the next guy, but Chris Diamantopoulos should have been the MCU Hercules. Moving on. I'll say action-wise, Red Notice has its moments, it's competently shot, all the choreography is solid. That's the thing. Besides the general vibe, there's nothing wrong with this movie, but the vibe is bad. Like, this movie is littered with cliches. And listen, I don't have anything against a well-used cliche. After all, they're cliches for a reason. But there needs to be something new, right? Otherwise, like, what are we watching? Just bits that have been done a million times, stapled together and packaged in this very expensive wrapping paper? Like, this movie is full of scenes where someone is already where the guy they were chasing is going. And many of them don't make any sense. But forgetting about logic, it just gets boring. Like, yeah, this guy walked into a room and nothing immediately happened. That must mean the other guys in the room. Okay, cool. But also, individual lines are nothing but cliches. Gal Gadot has an exchange with an analyst she has taken hostage, where she drops rapid fire. This is why we can't have nice things. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. I really thought you were different, and well, fool me once. It is the least quotable movie ever, because every quote would come from another movie. This is to say, Red Notice is fine. Very well shot action, with stars very competently doing their thing, but besides the very specific combination of actors, there really is not anything new here. So wait, does this mean people saw the Red Notice trailer, went to see if it was already on Netflix, found a movie called SAS Red Notice, and assumed that that was the one with The Rock, but then they watched it for more than 5 minutes and then just finished it? And not like a couple of people, but like millions of people watched this movie, at least originally thinking it was a completely different movie? And you may be saying, well, maybe these people did not know this wasn't the real one. Like, maybe they just knew Red Notice, but nothing else. I would buy that if the movie was not sold exclusively on the star power of Dwayne Johnson, Ryan Reynolds, and Gal Gadot. I don't think those Venn diagrams overlap very much. Like, people who were excited enough about Red Notice on the day the trailer came out that they tried to watch it immediately, and people who don't know who is in Red Notice. But you may be saying, well, it might not have been the most watched movie, but that doesn't mean everyone finished it. And since we don't know how the top 10 list qualifies a view, it would be completely plausible that people watch the movie for 2 minutes, the amount of time that some rumors point to being the basis for a view, and then turns it off after 5. So SAS Black Swan would have high view numbers but low overall watch time. However, we can see from their global charts that SAS Red Swan, or whatever we're calling it, was also the movie with the second highest watch time of that week. It got 32,730,000 hours. For reference, when Fear Street Part 3 premiered in July of that year, it got 20,080,000 hours. So Netflix's heavily anticipated and heavily advertised horror trilogy finale scored 17 million fewer watch hours than the average spy movie that most people seem to be watching by accident. So what does this say about the platform? While Netflix's brand with TV is strong, its movie brand has been slipping for a while. I remember the Red Letter Media review of Cloverfield Paradox describing Netflix as the new direct-to-video, like forgettable movies, and I'm absolutely not saying that Netflix's originals are all terrible, but I wouldn't say that the brand is strong if any random movie that no one saw 10 years ago is able to rocket up the charts past the entire Netflix film catalog. And as a media company, it isn't great that you announce your $200 million mega movie, people turn it on and see a movie that can't have cost more than $20 million to make and think, yeah, that's probably it. It would be like if Disney put out a trailer for the new Avatar movie and people went to Disney Plus, found the Airbender movie that everyone hates, and just watched it, never realizing they didn't watch the right one. Just like, yeah, I guess these water people don't like that guy with the scar. Who knew? And I think it comes down to how we consume media these days and the contradiction at the heart of Netflix. You see, it used to be that TV was consumed both passively and actively. You had a show you wanted to watch, so you made time. You tuned in and you shut up. It's called appointment viewing. But also, maybe you put on TBS while you were cleaning up and very casually checked in on an office marathon for a few hours to show in the background. Both of those were normal. And the problem is, Netflix wants to be appointment viewing, but it has conditioned us to expect shows in the background. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, actor and filmmaker Justine Bateman, someone who did a lot of work before my time, so I mostly know her as Nellie from Arrested Development, talked about her experiences with streaming companies, saying, "I've heard from showrunners who are given notes from the streamers that this isn't second screen enough," meaning the viewer's primary screen is their phone and the laptop, and they don't want anything on your show to distract them from their primary screen, because if they get distracted, they might look up, be confused, and go turn it off. I heard somebody use this term before. They want a visual muzak. When showrunners are getting notes like that, are they able to do their best work? No. And whether purposefully or not, that appears to be the environment Netflix has created. And that environment is not compatible with appointment viewing. But they want to have it both ways. In 2018, Netflix released The Christmas Chronicles, starring Kurt Russell as Santa Claus, which was fine. There was less Kurt Russell than you'd expect, and outside of a musical number, I can't remember much from the movie, although I'm pretty sure an elf tried to cut a kid in half with a chainsaw. But at the time, Netflix's chief content officer, Ted Sarandos, said that according to Russell, The Christmas Chronicles had the most impact of any of the actor's movies after its release. It's because, even in his successful career, he's never had that many people see one of his movies in the first week ever, Sarandos said. That's a testimony to what we can bring to the market for storytellers today that we couldn't have 10 years ago. Which no, it is ludicrous to say that this movie had the biggest impact on Kurt Russell's career. That data just doesn't tell the whole story. For instance, we don't know how Netflix calculated those 20 million viewers. And remember, this was in 2018 before we had the kind of data we have now. Were those 20 million people who watched 70% of the movie, or 20 million people who watched the first 2 minutes? Because that seems like an important distinction. Go ahead, watch the first 2 minutes of Serenity, then tell your friend you watched it and see how that conversation about the movie goes. But I also think that data discounts the theater experience. Now, I do think there is something a bit elitist about people who say that the real way to experience a movie is at a top-of-the-line cinema, since many people don't have the money to see every movie in a cinema, and many people don't have these high-quality IMAX theaters available to them. And roll that all in with the fact that in the middle of a global pandemic, studios still wanted us to go to the theaters and catch coronavirus to watch New Mutants, and the whole theater experience loses a lot of charm. But while I think most movies can be equally appreciated at home and at a theater, I do believe that some of the experience does help make a movie at a cinema feel different. You need to get dressed, drive to a theater, buy a ticket, buy concessions probably, find a seat, be quiet, and then drive home. That's a lot more effort than just turning on Netflix, seeing a movie, paying nothing specifically for that movie, and then watching it while you're on your phone. I'm not saying the theater is better, it's just different. And the effort it takes to travel and pay for a movie can change how you perceive the movie. This is just my opinion, but streaming movies tend to, not always, but tend to feel more disposable than movies in theaters. Easy come, easy go. Like when someone asks you which movies you saw in a given year, there's a good chance a lot of them were streaming movies, but they don't usually make it onto a top 10 list. Again, this is totally anecdotal, but I don't think the comparison Netflix made is reasonable, especially because it relies on a single, unclear metric that at the time Netflix decided to share, which is why the rest of the quote really bugged me. Sorrento says, "The Christmas Chronicles had 20 million views in its first week. If every one of those was a movie ticket purchase, that's a $200 million opening week. Even movies that go on to $1 billion don't typically do that in the first week." And listen, it is impossible to say whether Christmas Chronicles, a very average movie with one big star who isn't used particularly well, some dodgy effects, and a lot of clunky dialogue, would have made more money than, say, The Avengers. Also, Ted, not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, every movie released in 2018 that eventually hit $1 billion had an opening weekend of over 200 million. One movie, Fantastic Crimes of Grindelwald, opened well over 200 million and ended up at about 650 million globally. But this narrative hasn't disappeared over time. Just the other day, Zack Snyder said on the Joe Rogan podcast, you think about Netflix for instance, where you push a button, Rebel Moon, right? Say now it's like almost 90 million views, 80 or 90 million accounts turned it on, give or take. They assume 2 viewers per screen, right? That's the math. So that's 160 million people supposedly watching. 160 million people at $10 a ticket, that's 1.6 billion. So more people probably saw Rebel Moon than saw Barbie in the theater. That's how crazy Netflix is. That's the distribution model they've set up. Now, Zack eventually clarified his comment and said to IO9, "The cultural significance of Barbie was happening when it was in the theaters. That's when we all took a bite of the Barbie apple, and happily. And so my only point is that I think there is a theatrical zeitgeist, and even though maybe more people have eyes on something, the actual sort of cultural significance is dictated still by the theater." So I think Zack gets it. Netflix movies don't matter the same way theatrical releases do. They come and go, they're disposable, but perhaps because of that, it feels like we're in a bubble. Netflix subscription prices are going up. They're cracking down on password sharing, and they're putting that extra revenue towards making what ends up being the 4th or 5th most expensive movie of that year. But why? What value do these movies actually bring if they can be confused with any similar and far less expensive movie? And if they can be so easily forgotten about? I don't have a solution here besides Netflix needs to do better, make better movies, more memorable movies, because I think audiences understand the difference between a series that's appointment viewing and one that's visual muzak, and we adjust our expectations accordingly. But I think because these big budget Netflix original movies have been so forgettable, we have been trained to expect visual muzak. And this is not just a Netflix problem. Apple TV Plus gave us Ghosted. Max gave us The Witches. Really, the only one that feels like they're getting this right is Hulu. Palm Springs in 2020, Fresh and Prey and Rosalind in 2022, and No One Will Save You in 2023 are 5 examples of really excellent straight-to-streaming movies. In fact, the attitude at the time was that they deserved theatrical release. So I think Netflix, Max, Apple TV Plus, and all the other ones need to follow Hulu's lead. Focus on high-concept quality instead of something designed to appeal to everyone. And give the movies theatrical releases either way. Or just don't bother. Leave the movies to the film studios and focus on what's really important. Making a new season of Glow, and a new season of Teenage Bounty Hunters, and a new season of Santa Clarita Diet, and, finishing the other 20 series I really liked but got abruptly canceled. Also make more Girls 5 Eva. But until then, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is an aggregate site that shows you how the media around the world is covering any single story, and compares and contrasts their coverage based on the political leadings and who owns the publication. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. So for instance, Take this story. It's about how the Washington Post had the picture of the upside down flag at Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's house 3 years ago, but didn't do anything with it then. Got 29 total sources, 10 lean left, 4 lean right, 12 are center. You can see the bias distribution there. And then you can look at all of the articles, see what the difference is between them. For instance, in the leaning left and center publications, the story tends to be about how we covered the Supreme Court now versus how we covered it 3 years ago, considering since then we've had decisions like the Dobbs v. Jackson decision that ended the national right to abortion. Compare that to the right-leaning publications like, say, the New York Post, which used this new reporting to make the case that this was never a story, and it's just a normal thing that happens, and it's weird that anybody cares about it. And it's funny, in the text of the story, they never reference the second flag that the Alitos flew at their beach home, but they do put the picture of it there, because it's like, hey, what about that? But that just goes to show how different news organizations can cover the same story. They've even got an entire section devoted to the 2024 election, and a blind spot section where you can look at stories disproportionately reported on by one side or the other. And listen, do you need to read every single thing from the other side? No. But I do think it's useful for just understanding what people are talking about, because without that, we're living in two different worlds. So check them out. I think Ground News is so useful that I'm offering 40% off their Vantage subscription. You can only access this discount through my link, so go to ground.news/NandoVMovies or click the link in the video description and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. As always, huge thanks to everybody that continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody that watches these videos early and ad-free on Nebula, everybody that listens to my podcast Mostly Nitpicking, and everyone that follows me all over social media. I'm NandoVMovies everywhere. That's all I got. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.